All right, we have Jasmine Garcha with us. Long time no see. We went to elementary school together. I
Elementary,
think all the
yeah.
way back to like grade 1 or even kindergarten.
Grade three, grade three.
Good
That's what,
memory.
yeah, that's when I came to Clayton, grade three.
Wow. Okay, so glad
Yeah.
I asked that question. So, who would have thunk that, back when we were, I guess, what, 9, that we would be here now, 31,
I
talking
know.
to each other about
Yeah.
current events
Hmm.
and having some real kind of or somewhat of a sense of what's going on. So I reached out to you, Jasmine, about the farmers' protest
Hmm. Yeah.
happening in India
Yeah.
in regards to the recent passings of laws
Hmm.
by the Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what's going on there. We've had somebody on before, but it was very much just a sort of a brief
Hmm.
kind of overpass of what's happening. But there's much more deeper implications to this. So
Definitely. Yeah. So the Indian government, Prime Minister Modi, he passed three very controversial farm laws that basically, in a nutshell, are taking away the farmers' rights. They're basically opening the agricultural market up to corporations who he very much is backed by. And so since then, the farmers in India have been protesting. And so they've actually reached day 170 in Punjab since they've been protesting, and day 105 on the borders of Delhi since they've been protesting, so the capital city of India. And what started out as a farmers' protest is still very much about the farm laws, but has become such a bigger issue. It's become very much a human rights issue, particularly with a lot of the recent happenings that have happened.
right, because now it's gone from protesting to violence
Mhm.
and the suppression of freedoms.
Very much the suppression of everything, basically.
Mhm.
I mean, the farmers, when they were going from Punjab to Delhi, which they call Delhi Chalo, which means go to Delhi, was what the name of the kind of movement was called initially 105 days ago when they, started going to Delhi. And these farmers were traveling by foot, by bike, by horses, by tractors, by trolleys, all modes of transportation. And they were met just initial at those initial stages. They were met with violence by the police, tear gas, water cannons, lathi charge, which is basically hitting them with sticks. So they were met with violence from the get-go, and that hasn't stopped. These farmers have been on the streets of Delhi at the border of Delhi for 105 days now, and the police has basically tried to use every means of oppression to stop them and to get them to go back and basically silence them. Everything from violence to censorship.
Now, so Delhi is that the political capital of
Hmm. Yeah, so New Delhi is the capital of India, and
right?
that's where the center government is. That's like basically like our center government is in Ottawa.
Ottawa, yeah.
Um, India's center government is in Delhi.
And my understanding is that Modi, he's the prime minister, but there's also the president.
Yeah, there is a president as well. The president isn't really involved. I'm not really sure I like what his role really is, but he's not really involved in kind of like the day to day of things. A lot of that is all done by like Prime Minister Modi. Yeah,
Yeah, so it sounds like the president is almost like a figurehead,
pretty
kind of like
much.
the
Yeah,
queen or something like that.
exactly. Yeah.
Which don't get me started on the queen, but
Oh, that's a whole other conversation.
yeah. That tune in next time.
Exactly.
But yeah, Russia's kind of the same. They have the
Mm,
the, the president who doesn't do.
yeah.
For all intents and purposes, he's powerless.
Yeah.
And then the prime minister or whatever he's
Hmm.
called, which is Putin,
Yeah.
and well, everybody knows Putin. So
Yeah.
now, how many people? What was kind of hard to get a sense of was the quantity of people that are being affected by this.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
mean,
millions.
over millions, definitely. Like, I mean, over half of India's workforce is within the agricultural industry. And so you're not just talking about the farmers who own the land or lease the land and are farming, but you're also talking about the mazdurs, who are the laborers, who are the ones that work on the farms. So you're talking about a whole number of people that are, employed in the agricultural industry. But then there's a larger issue at hand as well of like the implications of these farm laws and what it's going to do to the price of food. And that's essentially going to affect everyone in India. Of course, the rich people will survive, but the poor people who are already struggling, who are on like a daily wage where they earn their money today and that's what they use to buy food for dinner that night, kind of the day-to-day earners. How are they going to survive? So it really is far-reaching impact. And it's not, we're sitting here in a Western country and we like to think that things happening across the world don't really impact us, but so much of our food is imported from countries like India. And so there's that wider, global impact that all of this has.
Well, I think that the population of India is like 1 billion people or something like that.
Yeah, it's over 1 billion. Yeah.
And if half their population is based on, agriculture, that's over 500 million people.
Oh, yeah.
So, if it's like any kind of resource. If there's, I'm not a finance guy or an economics guy. But numbers
don't work.
Yeah. But again, understanding, the humanity of it all, that if there's a deficit, it's going to have to come from somewhere to reach that, the supply, the demand.
Exactly.
And that could come from Canada. Or, I know where we live in the lower mainland of British Columbia, a number of farmers here are Punjabi.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, and obviously they originated from where this is happening.
Yeah.
So how did it come to be that in northern India we became aware of what was happening?
So there actually hasn't been, from the beginning days, there wasn't really a lot of media coverage that was happening. The news that, me being Punjabi, the news that we were really getting at the initial days was really from people in India, talking to family and friends back that are still in India, and really trying to get a sense of what was happening. And certain, Instagram, Twitter pages were posting more information. And that's still very much our main source of information, is these independent Instagram pages, Twitter pages, independent journalists who are sharing things. And that's really how we're still getting the bulk of our information. And international media really, for the most part, hasn't been covering it that much. It's increased a little bit now, and part of that does have to do with a tweet that Rihanna made. Who would have thought that, Rihanna would become so popular in India? Well, popular or not popular, depending on who you ask.
Right.
But Rihanna just basically retweeted an article from, I think it was CNN, and her tweet basically was, "Why aren't we talking about this?" And that set off this whole storm across the world. And after that, we started seeing things more. We saw like Greta Thunberg talk about it. Mina Harris has been very vocal about it. Rupi Kaur has been vocal about it from the beginning. I've seen kind of a clip on Trevor Noah talking about it. I believe there's like American football, NFL player, I think it was like Juju something, who donated like $10,000 towards medical assistance for farmers. So we're hearing about it more now, but still, if you ask like the majority of people, they might know that there's something happening in India, but they still don't know the full extent of it. Yeah.
Especially the consequences, like, because really what's happening is, my understanding is that India is supposed to be a democracy, just like every country is supposed to be a democracy. But what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
And it sounds like what's happening in India is it's becoming like a, it's like a corporate nation or something like that. Like essentially, if what I'm understanding is correct, I don't know however many, millions of acres of land are up there and even how it's distributed, but you know, my understanding is that every farmer has a chunk of land. You know, they have, let's say they have 10 acres.
Yeah.
Each farmer has 10 acres. Well, they're conglomerating all of that into one, and they're selling it off to corporations.
Basically, yeah. In a nutshell, like India is supposed to be a democracy, supposed to be.
Yeah.
But basically everything that's been happening is basically not a democratic process.
Right.
It's basically become, I think I saw a post somewhere about like how India has kind of become like a partial democracy, where because no democratic processes are being followed, really not just with the farmers' protests, but since Prime Minister Modi has come into power, there's been like he's basically privatized everything basically. And so it's like a huge wider problem that's happening. But with these new farm laws, essentially, like, you know, some farmers own like an acre of land, some own more acres of land. It really all depends. But basically, like, this is like an entire way of life for them that's at risk. And so
Right.
their livelihood is at risk. They're fighting for their rights, and like these new farm laws are basically making the way for corporations to come in and just take away everything they worked for their entire life.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with, in China, there was the great leap forward.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, it was this period of Mao Zedong. You know, for listeners, please do correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but my understanding is Mao Zedong, it was after the Second World War, it was in like the 50s. And they were like, we need to become a superpower. We need to compete on a global scale. But in order to do that, we have to, you know, great leap forward. There has to be massive sacrifices. So he put all this money into, like, he essentially focused it on the commercial epicenters of China, you know, these production places.
Yeah.
And the farmers and everything in the interior of China, they all like starved and millions of people died. It sounds like this is what we're looking at here if we don't act.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, farmers in India have been oppressed for many, many years now. This is just another layer to it. You know, more than half of Indian farmer households are in debt, and there's a growing farmers' suicide crisis. In the last 2 years, I believe it's more than 20,000 farmers have committed suicide due to the debt that they're in. Yeah. And because basically what's happened over the years is, I can't remember the year now, but there was, I think it was in the 60s, I believe, there was like the Green Revolution, which was to try and, you know, get farming going in India because there was problems. And then it's from there, it's kind of been like one thing after another. And, you know, there was the introduction of getting aid from the US on how to, you know, how do you make your farms flourish? And, you know, Monsanto came in, and that's a whole other conversation. But it, you know, these farmers have been in so much debt, crippling debt, that they're unable to pay off. And now you're adding this other layer on top of it where you're basically taking away what they do have. It's not sustainable, and they're going to become basically laborers on their own land, and they're not going to be able to survive. And we've seen this already happen in another state in India, in Bihar, where basically this same model has already been put into place. And those farmers weren't able to survive. And those farmers, people who were farmers there, are either now farming in Punjab or other areas, or they're working as laborers
they've been dispossessed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the same thing that's going to happen now, not just in Punjab. Like, Punjab is always a topic of conversation and coming up the most because that's where the bulk of the agricultural land is. But this is going to affect farmers all across India. And so there's been support from farmers in Rajasthan and Kerala, like all across India. Because
now, where we live, the lower mainland, right? That's because the region of the Punjab is so many people have come here from there specifically.
Yeah.
And is this part, is this as a response to all these laws that have gradually been coming through, that people have been pressured to leave in India, northern India, to come to Canada and to pursue farming here?
Yes and no. It's like there's a lot of layers to why people are leaving, you know, their homeland and going abroad, whether it's Canada, the US, the UK, wherever. There's a lot of reasons behind it. I mean, for those of some people that came in the 80s, it had to do with, you know, violence against the Punjabi community, violence against the Sikh community. It had partially to do with that. So there's lots of layers to it. People come for better opportunities. But yeah, definitely, like, I mean, my family still owns land in India.
Right.
We don't farm it ourselves, obviously, because we're here in Canada, but we have our farmland leased out. So this, you know, is of concern to all of us, because so many people, part of the diaspora, whether you're, you know, in Canada or the UK or US, we still have those ancestral links to India. And so, you know, there's those links that we have, and some of us still have family there. Some of us still have land there. But it's like that larger question of like, what do we, like, you know, what do we do as global citizens when there's a regime like the BJP government, which is the Prime Minister Modi's government, that's actively working to oppress its citizens? So it's, you know, it's a huge human rights issue that, you know, we're now concerned about the safety of our families and friends back home as well.
Well, because and I was looking it up really quickly, but with the Great Leap Forward, what happened is they were trying to pull China from an agrarian society into a communist society. And it's a great leap, right? You know, millions of people died. And it sounds like India, it's obviously, it's not trying to go into a communist society, but it's trying to go into this technological behemoth.
Yeah.
Right. And because who's the number one producer of the COVID vaccine? India.
Yep.
Right. So it sounds like, again, with India, Modi is trying to make this shift, this jump from, you know, being this agrarian society in the north, because India is massive, of course.
Yeah.
To, some kind of a continued technological powerhouse in what's going on in the world. I mean, because the 21st century, you know, this is the future, what we're doing, you and I.
Yeah.
If COVID's taught us anything, it's like, well, I guess I got to get blue blocker glasses.
Yeah.
The means of communication.
Exactly.
Is that sort of the fear that this is what's happening? Is they're trying to get rid of this farmland to just have it so it's easy to govern it, right? Because if it's in the hands of the few, it's a lot easier to control that, keep tabs on it, than if it's in the hands of millions.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's also the role that corporations are playing. And, you know, arguably you can say that Modi is basically like a puppet.
Yes.
And he's backed by these billionaires like Ambani and Adani, and they're the ones that have made moves to like monopolize farming for many years, but they needed the help to remove those barriers. And so, you know, that's where Modi comes in. They were basically, you know, the biggest donators to his campaign when he was running for election. And they're the ones that are profiting from this. And, you know, during the pandemic, while, you know, everyone's stuck in lockdown and, you know, becoming poorer, their worth was just going up. Like they were just, you know, making, you know, doubling their wealth basically while the rest of India's in lockdown. And, you know, so it's, you know, they've privatized a whole bunch of different things. And so it's that role of corporations. And it's really, a lot of it just comes down to that money and greed, really.
Well, that's the, you know, that's the currency of the world.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, nobody cares how nice of a person you are.
No.
So these corporations, what exactly is, like Amazon's a corporation? What exactly is this corporation? Is it an agricultural corporation?
So they're both different. Like I don't remember the exact specifics, but I know like Ambani, I believe it's Ambani has a huge role in like uh I guess the media industry.
Holy fuck.
But
That's
not just,
insane.
yeah, not just media, but like a whole bunch of other things. Like if you just looked up what does the Ambanis own, like you're like, whoa, they own that, like basically everything. And you know, that also really ties in with a lot of the censorship that's been happening as
Of
well.
course.
It makes
They own the internet.
exactly. Oh yeah. Yeah. Basically.
Holy
Yeah.
yeah. My apologies for dropping a massive
It's all
F-bomb
good.
there, but yeah, I mean, now
Yeah.
I'm getting it. Okay, so if you control the internet, because this is what I was having a conversation with a friend of mine he's from Nigeria, and Nigeria is having some huge problems. You know, guess who the number one investor in Nigeria is? Take a guess. Country.
Country. Oh, India?
China.
China. Oh,
And
that makes sense.
I'm sure China is involved
Yeah.
in India as well. But anyways, so he's saying that they're trying to censor the internet because how are ideas nowadays quickly spreading? Right?
Yeah.
How are we able to mobilize?
Mhm.
You know, we don't have printer presses. We don't have the, you know, we can't be handing out flyers. That's way too obvious. The internet is such a discrete means of mobilizing people. So you control the internet, you can really suppress what's happening here.
Exactly. Yeah. And in India, there's been the censorship of basically everything. There have been internet shutdowns, so people can't communicate with each other, and bringing in internet jammers. But there's that whole larger conversation about social media, Google, Twitter, Facebook, and how they've made this attack on freedom of speech possible. Ambani's corporation, I think it's Geo Industries, they actually have some sort of stake in Facebook. And so there's actually been arrests of you know, a young climate activist, Disha Ravi, was arrested for supposedly for editing 2 lines of a Google Doc, which was kind of dubbed this whole toolkit that they kind of went on this rampage about. And basically what it was, that toolkit wasn't even created in India. It was created here in Canada. And it was basically just a toolkit of like, how can you create awareness about the farmers' protest? Just a document with like resource links. That's all it was. And they basically took this toolkit and made it seem like, you know, this was the conspiracy. This is where it all started. And it became this huge thing. But yeah, young girl Disha Ravi was arrested because she arrested 2 lines in, actually she edited 2 lines in a Google Doc, but really she was arrested to send a message to all of us that we're being tracked, and speaking up can land us in jail. And yeah.
Did she live in India?
She lives in India, yeah. And she doesn't even live in Delhi. She lives in Bangalore, which is, you know, South India. And she was arrested by Delhi police in Bangalore. So they had the authority to travel to another state and arrest this young climate activist. And Google is complicit in the arrest of Disha Ravi because Indian police has confirmed that Google aided them in their investigation regarding a Google Doc. So Google provided private user data on a Google Doc, which led to the arrest of a young activist.
Why would Google want to do this?
It's $1 million question. And it really comes down to what people are saying is that with over 1 billion people, like India is a lucrative market, which is why Twitter, Facebook, Google are choosing to be complicit in the attack on human rights and freedom of speech by an oppressive government. Yeah. And Twitter has also banned certain accounts at the request of the Indian government.
Well, my buddy got banned on Twitter, and he lives here.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And they've been really attacking people here as well, in lodging, you know, I believe there was an FIR, which is, I guess, like I don't know exactly what it is, but basically by the police to start an investigation on like Greta Thunberg for retweeting the toolkit, which was created here it was created here in Surrey. And the individuals who then created that document were getting death threats, and they still are. And so, which, you know, it's this fear mongering, trying to stop people like myself from talking up about it, of, you know, if we do this, then maybe they'll get afraid and they'll stop talking about it.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because a friend of mine he's very outspoken. I won't mention his name, of course, but he was going to come on here and speak about it. And then he said, hey man, I don't know if I can, because like you're saying earlier, he has family in India. He wants to take his daughters there.
Yeah.
Right. And if he says something, he's putting himself in a very dangerous situation.
Very much. And I've had these conversations like with my parents as well. I'm like, I'm basically putting myself at risk of never being allowed to go back to India again by tweeting about it, by speaking up about it. But I'm like, I can't sit here and be quiet for fear of what the repercussions may be. And I'm like, if I was in India right now, I probably would have been arrested for, you know, tweeting in support of something or another. And so a lot of people are afraid. And like my grandma's told me, like, don't say anything, like, you know, don't publicly say anything about it. And I'm like, I'm not afraid. But for many people, it is a very much a valid fear. And there are a lot of, you know, artists within the Punjabi community who are living abroad, living here in Surrey or the UK or whatever, that have been speaking up. And I have a lot of respect for them, because they're putting themselves at risk by speaking up.
They're definitely putting their comfort on the line.
Oh yeah.
And you know what? I'm at this point in my life when it's like, comfort. Do I want to live a comfortable life and just pretend like nothing is happening?
Yeah.
Or do I want to, you know, it's like the whole Plato's allegory of the cave, and I'm an idiot too. So it's like, you know, they picked a great person to become aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
I can hardly form a sentence. But anyways, am I going to just it's like the Matrix. Am I going to accept this new information and do something about it? Or because I've received this information, or am I going to accept this information and do nothing and just watch, you know, as irreparable changes continue to happen before our very eyes?
Yeah.
You know, I can't keep watching, you know, I can't think of a lame show on Netflix. I can't keep watching The Bachelor.
Yeah.
Right. That's imprisoning. We are becoming prisoners of our comfort.
Yeah.
And there's something about doing this work, and yeah, it's scary or whatever, but it actually makes you feel alive, because it's like, man, I can't, you know, I have to accept this.
Yeah. And it's like doing our parts of amplifying the voices of the suppressed, of the oppressed. And like,
that's privilege.
You know, it's privilege. It's a privilege that we have, that, you know, we can talk about it. Yeah, maybe I might get blacklisted and I might not be able to go to India because of a tweet or something, but I can't just watch those videos of, you know, people. I see those images of the elderly, and I see my grandparents there. If my grandparents were alive, and if my grandparents hadn't come to Canada, our family would still be there. We would still be there. And so I see those images, and like, it's been, you know, for many of us who are part of the diaspora, who are here, seeing those images, and it has really connected us back to our roots so much these last couple of months, of seeing those images, seeing our people, and seeing the pain and the suffering that they're going through, seeing how they're being treated. How can you watch a video of a grandma or a grandpa crying and not feel like you have to do something about it, and just sit quietly? I'm like, I can't do that. I can't just sit here quietly and not say anything.
And I think it's like, you don't even necessarily need to be connected to the diaspora. You just need to be a human being.
Exactly. And it's that issue of humanity, human rights issue. And you see the violence against farmers, like the police oppression, and the police basically allowing these goons to come in and be violent against these peaceful protesters, and you see images of that. You see, things like Disha Ravi being arrested, and not just Disha Ravi, but there's been two labor activists like Nodeep Kaur and Shiv Kumar, who were basically arrested for protesting. They were basically protesting about factory workers' rights, and they were arrested and abused, violently attacked, sexually assaulted in prison, and for days. And there was the arrest of Mandeep Punia, who was an independent journalist, and beat up. And with Mandeep Punia, nobody would have even known where he was if someone hadn't caught it on video, and if that video hadn't gone viral. And they basically arrested him, and for days nobody knew where he was. And that's not just with Mandeep Punia. There's hundreds of farmers ranging in age from young people to elderly, like I'm talking 80-year-old men who have been arrested, and nobody knows where they are. And they've been arrested for peacefully protesting.
I'm reading about, are you familiar with Dick Gregory?
I'm not, no.
He was like a civil rights activist during the Montgomery boycotts and what was happening in the United States. And he was saying, like, yeah, there were 80-year-old people going to jail. And he's like, why are you doing this? Yeah. In his autobiography. And the guy's like, for freedom.
And that's what these farmers have been saying. That's what these elderly farmers have been saying. They've been saying from the get-go, they're like, we're okay if we die here on the borders of Delhi. We're fine if we die here because we've lived our lives. We're fine with that. But we can't sit at home and watch our lands be taken away from us and know that this is going to impact our future generations. This is going to impact our kids, our grandkids.
Right.
And so these, our elders are willing to die for their rights, to sacrifice themselves for their rights. And, the least that we can do is amplify their voices and support them.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, what a sacrifice that they're saying, I've lived my life, and it's almost like, imagine if that's how we were with global warming, right? Like, the dirty old white men that run all the shit in the Western world.
Exactly.
If they would say, hey, you know what, maybe I should stop caring so much about my economic dollar. I can't even think of what the word is for it. My overcost or my overage, my overhead.
Yeah.
And maybe I should care about the world. Maybe I won't get to enjoy it, but somebody should.
Exactly. And, there are climate deniers, climate change deniers, who are in leaders of power. But
you'd almost have to be, you know what I mean? Like, there's this degree of, like, the evidence is so obvious and what you're doing is so blatantly in the face of it that either you're an idiot or it's like the anti-maskers. It's like, do you really believe this or are you just being an asshole?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So either you're a fool, you're ignorant, you're a fool, or you're just a really terrible person. Like Ted Cruz, when he went to, Mexico or something. Meanwhile, there's clearly a climate related crisis happening in Texas. And it's like, I have no idea that was going on. Like,
I know that was happening. Oh, really? Right. And it's the same with when Trump went to India the last time, they called it, I think they call it the Namaste Trump tour. There was protests happening at that time against I believe it was what was the protest that was happening at the time, but basically it was about Muslim rights, and people were being killed on the streets and attacked on the streets by the police over protesting about Muslim rights, and Trump don't care, and he's there, and it's like there's a reason why Trump and Modi were like great friends. And before Prime Minister Modi became prime minister, he was actually banned from multiple countries, including the US, the UK, and other countries, because he was implicated in the 2002 Gujarat Muslim genocide. So he was banned from entering countries like the US and the UK and other nations.
Well, and I think that the religious background of India is such a complicated one that many people might not understand, myself included.
Yeah.
But to be Muslim in India, because there's the caste systems, right? And I think that the higher castes are predominantly Hindu.
Yes and no. So there's a caste system, and then there's the religion. So it's like there's overlap between them, but then there isn't at the same time. But India very much has a history of oppression against Muslims and Sikhs for the most part. And it's not the whole of India. At these farmers' protests, we've seen images of Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, all praying together, all holding space for each other for their own individual religions. So there's definitely been a unity amongst the religions. But it's the BJP, which is basically a Hindu extremist. And we have extremists in every religion. But it's like, it's the extremists, and it's not all Hindus, because, there's Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs that are all together, but it's the extremists.
Yes.
And that's really where the violence against all these other religions comes from. And Modi has his connection to the RSS, which is a fascist radical Hindu organization, as well.
Holy.
Yeah, and like the RSS is like basically playing a role in the degradation of India's democracy into like a hyper nationalist authoritarian state, which is what we're seeing.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it. Yeah,
because essentially RSS, what does that stand for? Because the Nazis stood for, what was it? It was like the National Socialists. That's what Nazi stood for, National Socialist, which you're like, well, that sounds kind of great, before knowing what a Nazi is, of course. But yeah, the RSS, I'm sure it's
basically, oh gosh, I don't even know how to say it, but it's basically a words in Hindi,
right.
But it's basically, a Hindu extremist kind of organization. Like, I don't know a lot about them, but there's been so much that, Modi has done. I'm going to pull this up here. And like in his rhetoric recently, Modi recently in Parliament, actually, during his speech, Modi called these protesters parasites and anti-nationalists who have been influenced by foreign destructive ideologies. And he never once referred to these farmers as peaceful protesters. And so you see a lot of overlap between what happened in Nazi Germany and what's happening with Modi and his approach, calling these protesters parasites.
Well, even Trump did that with Black Lives Matter. He was, funny, not funny as in haha, but isn't it interesting how these leaders on the far right, because that's, let's call it what it is. They're on the far right. They have the same agenda. All that's different is just the words that they use. I also looked up, RSS stands for, and my apologies on the pronunciation, Rashtriya Samwasevek Sangh, which translates into English as the National Volunteer Organization, which again, there's the language of national, right? Yeah. So, and in a country like India, people have got to understand, it's like Canada. Well, I'm going to try and compare it to Canada. The East Coast and the West Coast are two completely different countries in terms of culture, and everything. And India is just, there's so many different cultures. To have a unified, national identity, it's like, how is that going to happen without there being some serious repercussions?
For sure. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just so many layers to what's happening there right now.
So what is the projection of what will happen in the next, I don't know, coming years?
Probably more of what's been happening. And it's been 100, what is it? What did I say? 105 days since they've been on the borders of Delhi. And not once has Prime Minister Modi spoken to these farmers himself. Not once has he had dialogue with them. In fact, dialogue between the farmers and, Parliament has been very limited and sparse and very divided. And I don't think they've really had any conversations as of recent days, because the farmers want a full repeal of all the laws. And the government is not willing to budge on it. They're saying they'll do this or they'll do that. And they're like, well, we'll suspend the laws for, I think it's 18 months.
Mm.
What is that going to do? You basically just want them to go back home, and then you're just going to do what you're going to do anyways. And so what does the future hold for India? Like, as long as I personally feel, this is my personal opinion, I personally feel that as long as Prime Minister Modi continues to be in power, we're just going to keep seeing more and more of the same.
Has there ever been like a positive, like an example of the prime minister that India needs?
Oh, that's a tough one. Like, I don't pay as much attention to Indian politics as I have been, of recent days. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, like, obviously India needs a diverse, inclusive prime minister.
Yes.
And that's questionable if that will ever happen. Yeah.
I know this is going to sound extreme, so please,
For sure,
shoot it right back at me, but India is massive.
Oh yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, it's like, geopolitically speaking, do the borders of that country make sense? I mean, take, for example, the region of Punjab, which my understanding is that really the true sense of that place extends into Pakistan.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Punjab has already been split up multiple times. First, it was with that partition of
1954
Pakistan, India.
or whatever.
Yeah. So the India-Pakistan partition. And then later on, I can't remember exactly when it was, but another part of Punjab was taken and made into another state. And so the oppression of Punjab has happened for many, many, many years. And it's with dividing dividing the state. There's been, oppression of farmers, diverting water away from that area, leading to droughts. There's been the oppression of the language, making Hindi mandatory in all schools and trying to oppress the Punjabi language. So much oppression against Punjabis just within the history of India.
Well, that's right. I mean, because even here in Surrey, they're trying to literally preserve the Punjab language.
Yeah,
because it's considered a dying language.
It is, yeah. Punjabi language is considered very much a dying language, and future generations are not getting that language. And for me, it's really important. That's a connection to my home, that's a connection to my ancestral roots. And so I'm very grateful that my parents were very strict growing up of like, I have to speak Punjabi at home. I hated it as a kid. Mm-hmm. I was like, I just want to be a normal kid. I just want to speak English. But at home, it was Punjabi only. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful now because I can connect with my elders. I can connect with my roots. I can understand things better. When I see future generations, like my younger cousins, they don't speak it at all.
Well, and I think as you mentioned, part of this, the problem of any cultural diaspora mm-hmm. is the generational changes that happen. Yeah. For example, I'm Scottish, but I have truly I have almost zero connection to Scotland other than my last name. And I love talking like I'm William Wallace sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
I learned something new about you, Scottish connections.
There you go. Right. But truly, it's like, as my point being is that, you know, you're pushed out of your country, you know, by whatever sort of reason it may be. You come here, and then the second generation gets it. But oftentimes it's the third generation that really sort of loses it. And it's actually, I've heard it's the same in like businesses, you know, like you have the first generation worked really hard, second generation, and then it's the third generation in any kind of company that's when it either sinks or it swims, right?
Definitely. And like you said, it's not just the Punjabi diaspora. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine who speaks Chinese, and she was saying that, like, you know, I can't remember if it was Mandarin or Cantonese. She was one of them. She's like, it's kind of a dying language. And she's like, she herself was like, she's like, I speak it with my grandma, and her grandma recently passed. So she's like, I feel like I'm more disconnected from my language. And I feel like there's moments where I start talking and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I saying things right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's like we're saying, there's no way to know if that connection is still, you know, authentic or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So with everything that's gone on in northern India, has that sort of made you more proud of that part of your identity?
Absolutely. I see, you know, the farmers that are protesting, and I see their spirit. And, you know, Chardi Kala, which essentially means to rise above challenges and maintain a mental state of external optimism and joy. And it's this like state of Chardi Kala that these farmers have been in after everything that they have faced. They have faced violence. They have faced oppression of all sorts. They basically were on the streets of Delhi during the winter months, and they've, you know, survived that. And now they're getting into the summer months. So it's getting hotter, there's mosquitoes and all that kind of stuff, but they have basically shown their spirit through this entire time. They've built, you know, if you look at the images of these protest sites, you look at them and you're like, wow, they've built libraries there so they can educate the elders, they can educate the kids that are coming along, because there are people that are coming along and they're bringing their kids with them, because this is their livelihood. And so they're bringing their kids with them because they don't have anywhere else to leave their kids, but they've built like libraries for them, little schools. They've built themselves a mall within a tent where you can basically go there and get everything. They've been doing like a langar seva, which is basically, you know, like free kitchen, which is a huge principle of like the Sikh religion.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, there's, you know, and farmers are protesters are taking what they need. There's no hoarding of anything. If somebody needs something, someone else got it. All right, we've got it, here you go. And just like this collective unity and oneness that we've seen from you know, the farmers' protests and just their spirit. And it's just inspiring, and it's really made me feel so much more connected to my roots and so much more proud of my roots. And it's really brought up a lot of dialogue as well with my parents and my grandma, that I've always been a very inquisitive person, wanting to learn more about my roots. But just having those conversations with, you know, my grandma and my dad, my mom, learning more about where they came from, and learning about, you know, my great grandparents, which I didn't know much about. So it's really connected me so much more to my roots. And, you know, there's from that and through I've always connected to my culture through music as well. And there's been a lot of, you know, Punjabi musical artists who have really utilized this art form of music to connect people, and songs about the Kisaan Morcha. So Kisaan means farmers, and Morcha is basically a gathering of like-minded people protesting for a cause, about the Kisaan Morcha. And it's just been so inspiring.
Well, and it's interesting that, you know, now as you're talking about how your pride for your background, your identity is increasing, but the consequences of standing up for this could make you not able to go to that place.
Yeah, very much. It's definitely a thought that so many of us who are, you know, activists here in, you know, Canada, UK, wherever it may be. It's a thought that's crossed so many of our minds, and it's dialogue that we've had amongst each other. And at the end of the day, I mean, I've only been to India once, and I went as a very much a privileged teenager who probably didn't appreciate it as much.
Which is typical of a teenager going traveling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've always wanted to go back. I was actually supposed to go back right before the pandemic started. We were planning a trip back there, and you know, there's definitely that thought crosses your mind of, will I even be allowed back into the country? But you know, these are my, you know, these are my roots, and so if it means I can't go back there, but I can amplify the voices of the oppressed, then that's just what it is.
Yeah. It's worth the sacrifice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think about these leaders, you know, Malcolm X, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and they make these huge sacrifices. It's their families that they're sacrificing, and it's their, I mean, I have a daughter, you know, and it's like, that to me is time away from her is the most difficult choice to make.
Yeah.
But the reward for the risk that I'm taking, for the sacrifice, is that the world could be a better place. And obviously what I'm doing is so trivial in comparison, but nothing good comes without sacrifice.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's really on us to, you know, whether it's what's happening in India or whether it's what's happening, there's so much, you know, human rights issues all across the world. Yes. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's really on us to amplify the voices. And, you know, I'm just an ordinary citizen with a voice, but people who are in power, people who are, you know, they have influence, they have that platform, and, you know, utilize it. If you have a platform, you have a voice, utilize it, because there's so many people around the world whose voices are suppressed and oppressed.
Isn't it like crazy to think that Rihanna, all she did was simply, you know, click, like I share things all the time. She pressed a little paper airplane thing, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And it's like,
basically lit a fire under India's.
Yeah.
Basically lit a fire. Like, people were like, they were burning images of Rihanna.
That's some queen shit. You know what I mean? Like, wow, that's power.
Like, exactly. It's like, imagine grown men burning pictures, images of, you know, they were burning images of Rihanna, Mina Harris, Greta Thunberg. Like, really? You're that afraid?
Maybe they'll burn pictures of us next. I would love that. My bald head looking like Caillou.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like these individuals who are like, you know, not even connected to the country by roots or anything, are utilizing their voices to speak up. Yet there's people in India, like pretty much the entire Bollywood industry and the sports industry, which aren't talking up at all, being they're just, you know, tweeting Modi's propaganda.
But that might also be fear too, right? Like,
yeah, it's basically, how would you put it? If you speak up, you're basically going to be attacked. Yeah. So basically, you know, yeah, they're just basically, and there's a huge thing between Bollywood and the government, where basically it's this like money exchange. That's all it is. And that, you know, protection really almost by the government if you preach their propaganda. But at what point do you continue to support something, and at what point do you say, I agree with that? Like,
this is against my virtues.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, when do your values really come in to play? Like, there was, after that tweet by Rihanna, like literally the day after, there was multiple Bollywood actors and actresses and even sports athletes, like a lot of cricketers, that were tweeting the exact same thing, word for word. It's like, Really? Did Modi send out a WhatsApp message to everyone saying like, hey,
Right.
y'all, we need to tweet back and say that like, outsiders shouldn't be talking in our internal matter, which is what he says that it is.
Yeah.
He says it's an internal matter. It's the country's internal matter, and people outside shouldn't be talking about it. I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau was attacked in the early days as well for saying that he supports the right for peaceful protest. And parliamentary people in India were saying that he shouldn't be interfering in an internal matter.
But here's the problem is if people aren't given the right to protest in a true democracy, right, then it does become an external, an issue. It becomes, Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere, an injustice somewhere is an injustice anywhere, meaning that if it could happen there, it could happen here. And I know I've said that before, but that is the reality. And that is even what, it does extend to here. And we talked about it earlier about lobbyism in municipal, policies and that. And that's why, we do need to step up for, like you say, the voiceless.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we like to think, and we're grateful to live in a country where like we have the right for freedom of speech, we have the ability to speak up, but you see things like the municipal government where, the voices of the residents are basically being shut down and oppressed. Public hearings, especially now that they're being done on the phone, Mayor McCallum just basically shuts the phone line off if he doesn't agree with you.
Yeah.
Where's the democratic process?
I'm going to say it on record, say Doug McCallum's a piece of shit.
I agree with you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah.
He already knows I hate him.
He's done, man. He's done. Stale Doug, I call him.
I've looked him in the eyes and told him I don't like him, so we're going on that front.
Good for you.
Yeah, I went to a public hearing and said my piece and looked him right in the eyes, and I'm like, I don't like you.
Yeah. Well, at least you're honest, right? I mean,
exactly.
Why waste time on pretense?
Exactly.
So, but the other thing is, and I'm just looking at the time here. I'm like, oh my God, 56 minutes. I knew this would happen. But in that show, Narco, who was the guy again? The big drug dealer.
I don't know. I haven't watched it. It's on my to-watch list. Sorry.
Pablo Escobar. What he said in the show on Netflix, I don't know if he actually said this, but to the cop, he was like, silver or lead, meaning like I could pay you off or I could kill you. Those are your choices. And I think in, perhaps what's kind of going on in the entertainment industry or whatever, these people of influence in India is they're thinking, maybe it's not being said to them, but it's like, hey, you take the payment or I kill your career or whatever, right? Oh,
and that's very much a reality, actually. There was a Bollywood actress who did tweet out and did speak out about it. And suddenly there was like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was like raids happening at her properties. So basically was being attacked by the government because she tweeted out in support of it. So it's very much a reality. And that just goes to show you the amount of power the government has.
Did you ever see that movie White Tiger? Is that the name?
I have not. No.
It's this new one on Netflix.
No, I haven't spent too much time on Netflix lately.
Good for you. Sometimes I like to watch a show, but I always try to make it so I can get something out of it.
I like to go in binges and then I stop for a couple of months and then I go in a deep dive binge again.
I gotcha. Well, in this show, I think it's White Tiger, White Lion, it takes place in India. And there's this socialist leader and she's, for the people, rah, rah, rah. And then she gets into power and she's like, if you want me to leave you alone, you better pay me off. Suggesting that we can all have good intentions. But when we get the power, we are all just theoretical until we get power and then we make that choice. Like, so you and I, it's rich coming from us. But when we're in that position of power, what we do, that's when we show who we really are.
Exactly. Yes.
So last kind of question for you. What do you think the real solution could be for this problem? What are the real things that we can do?
I think, the real solution really is the government of India needs to change. But I think as a whole, as global citizens, as people who have a voice, what we can do is we can amplify the voices of those whose voices are being oppressed. We can utilize our voices, our platforms to have that dialogue. And whether it's we're tweeting out or we're posting on Facebook or coming on a podcast, even just having dialogue amongst your circle of people. Having that dialogue, talking about the human rights issues. There's been so many human rights violations that have been done by the India government, from, you know, violence against protesters, by abducting journalists and protesters, you know, sexually abusing and torturing, you know, prisoners, the media censorship, and even at the protest sites, they've cut off water supplies. They've cut off access to bathroom facilities. They've tried to cut off access to the protest site so more food can't come in. So all of this stuff is happening, and all of this, you know, oppression is happening. The least that we can do is talk about it, create awareness. It doesn't take a lot. It's the very least we can do. It's the very least we can do. And you know, we've seen a lot of rallies happening in, you know, within the rest of the world, from everywhere from here locally in Vancouver to, you know, all over Europe, all over the UK, US, etc. And an example of like what our voices can do is in the UK, I believe it was 100,000 signatures on a petition by, you know, citizens of the UK. They signed a petition, and it was, I haven't watched it, but it was recently debated within Parliament. UK MPs talked about it and debated about it, and up until this point, the UK Prime Minister hasn't said anything about it, because he's a very much an ally, I guess you can say, of Modi. And so at what point do leaders continue to be silent allies of countries where things like this are happening, Canada included?
Complacency.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, the least that we can do is we can speak up, we can act, you know, be activists, protest about things, but just really create awareness. If the least we can do is create an awareness, share a post, share a message with somebody, you're doing something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, not to sound like a doomsday person or anything, but the internet is bringing upon us the end of political systems as we know it, I think, because it's the age of awareness. You know, you can't hide anything anymore. You
can't. And we've seen that in India, where it's a video of an independent journalist getting arrested is the only reason people knew that he was arrested. We've seen what a tweet from Riri can do, and basically, and so it's like the internet is powerful. And I mean, if it wasn't powerful, why would countries like India, other countries where, you know, things like this are happening as well, block it? Why would they ban the internet? Obviously, it's powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jasmine, thank you so much. It's been awesome catching up with you. I say this all the time, but I mean it every time. I hope that we can have you on again soon.
Absolutely. I would love to come on and talk about really anything. So thank you and thank you for, you know, creating awareness about this. It's nice to see more awareness being created, and as people like yourself who are utilizing your platform, that makes all the difference. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. And you're welcome. And like I said, it's the very least that I can do.
Yeah.
It's funny because people they're standing and they have their signs saying no farmers, no food. And I'm driving in my rickety Honda Civic and I'm honking and I'm like, yeah. And they're all like, what the hell is he? You know, but anyways, I'm all for the movement. So
love it.
glad to be of some service.
Yes.
Thank you.